World War II didn't just change history, it changed movies forever. Some films turned battlefields into gritty, unforgettable nightmares. Others gave us suspense, tension, and characters so real you could swear they were in your own platoon. But which ones actually nailed it? Which war movies deserve a spot in the all-time Hall of Fame? Well, get ready, because we're about to march through the best of the best. And trust me, there are some here you might not see coming. Saving Private Ryan, 1998. When Saving Private Ryan hit theaters, people walked out of the opening scene in shock. Not because it was bad, but because it was almost too real. Steven Spielberg's recreation of the D-Day landing at Omaha Beach isn't just cinematic, it's pure chaos captured on film. You've got sand turning red, soldiers screaming for medics, bullets snapping past your ears. Veterans said it was the closest thing they'd seen to actually being there, and some had to step outside to breathe. The story follows Captain Miller, played by Tom Hanks, leading a small squad behind enemy lines to find one man, Private James Ryan. The mission's simple on paper, but every step drags them deeper into the war's moral and physical hell. The cast? Incredible. Hanks leads with quiet authority, while actors like Tom Sizemore and Matt Damon bring the grit and humanity. Spielberg didn't romanticize the war here. The dirt stays in your teeth. The noise never stops, and the fear is constant. Critics called it a game-changer, influencing every war movie that came after it. Even the U.S. military praised its accuracy. 25 years later, it still stands as the modern benchmark for how to film a battle. If this isn't in your top 3 war films, we need to talk. The Thin Red Line, 1998. Released the same year as Saving Private Ryan, The Thin Red Line is the polar opposite in style. Terrence Malick isn't interested in just showing bullets flying, he wants you inside the heads of the soldiers. Based on James Jones's novel, it's set during the Battle of Guadalcanal, but instead of focusing only on the combat, it dives into the inner lives of the men fighting it. Malick's camera wanders, sometimes following a soldier into battle, sometimes just lingering on a bird or a patch of grass. It sounds strange for a war film, but that's exactly why it works. The cast is stacked. Sean Penn, Nick Nolte, Jim Caviezel, Adrian Brody, Woody Harrelson. Every one of them plays it raw and unpolished. There's no Hollywood sheen here. The battles feel chaotic, but they're also deeply human. You see fear, confusion, and moments of quiet reflection between the gunfire. Malick shot hours upon hours of footage, and a ton of actors, big names, were cut from the final edit. But what's left is something unique. A war movie that's both brutally intense and strangely beautiful. Some critics called it slow, but others said it was one of the most thoughtful depictions of combat ever made. It asks you to think about what war does to the human spirit, not just the body, and that's what makes it unforgettable. Letters from Iwo Jima, 2006. Clint Eastwood pulled off something rare here, telling the story entirely from the enemy's point of view. Letters from Iwo Jima is a companion to his other WWII film, Flags of Our Fathers, but instead of the American side, we see the Battle of Iwo Jima through Japanese soldiers' eyes, and it's still an American production, proving you can tell someone else's story with honesty and respect. The film is based on real letters found buried in the caves of Iwo Jima decades after the battle. Through them, we meet General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, played by Ken Watanabe, who knows the odds are impossible but still prepares to defend the island. The soldiers are trapped, supplies are low, and the U.S. invasion is unstoppable. But instead of faceless enemies, they're shown as men with families, fears, and their own small acts of courage. Eastwood filmed the whole thing in Japanese with subtitles, a risky move for a major American studio. But it paid off. Critics praised its authenticity and balance, showing that heroism and tragedy exist on both sides of a war. This isn't a movie about winning, it's about endurance, loyalty, and the cost of war when there's no way out. It's one of the few films that can make you see a famous battle in a completely different light. Flags of Our Fathers, 2006. If Letters from Iwo Jima shows the Japanese side of the battle, Flags of Our Fathers digs into what happened to the American soldiers after it. It follows the 6 men who raised the flag on Iwo Jima in that iconic photograph, one of the most famous images in U.S. history. But instead of making them untouchable heroes, Eastwood strips away the legend to show the complicated truth. The film cuts between brutal combat scenes and the post-war publicity tour where the surviving flag raisers are paraded across America to sell war bonds. It's powerful because it shows the gap between public perception and reality. These men are hailed as symbols, but they're still dealing with trauma, survivor's guilt, and the knowledge that the photo doesn't tell the whole story. Ryan Philippe, Adam Beach, and Jesse Bradford lead the cast, each bringing a different side to the emotional weight these soldiers carry. Eastwood doesn't shy away from showing how uncomfortable they are being called heroes when they watched so many others die. The battle scenes are as intense as anything in Saving Private Ryan, but it's the quieter moments, phone calls home, awkward speeches, flashbacks, that really land. It's a reminder that the real war often starts after the fighting ends. The Longest Day 1962. Before CGI, before modern battle choreography, there was The Longest Day, a black and white epic that tried to capture D-Day in all its chaos, and for its time, it was massive. Shot on location with thousands of extras, it tells the story of June 6, 1944, from multiple perspectives: American, British, French, and even German. The cast list reads like a Hollywood roll call: John Wayne, Henry Fonda, Richard Burton, Sean Connery, and Robert Mitchum, just to name a few. Each plays a real-life figure involved in the invasion, and the film jumps from one front to another without losing momentum. Because it was made less than 20 years after the war, many of the people involved had actually served in it. That authenticity shows, even in small details like uniforms, weapons, and military slang. Some scenes were even shot with the help of real paratroopers and soldiers who had been there on D-Day. The film was groundbreaking in using multiple directors for different segments, giving each storyline its own flavor. While it lacks the grit and blood of modern war movies, it's still an impressive achievement in scale and storytelling. Watching it now is like opening a time capsule from when W2 was still fresh in living memory. A Bridge Too Far 1977. If there's a phrase that sums up this movie, it's ambition on steroids. A Bridge Too Far isn't just about one battle, it's about one of the most daring and disastrous Allied operations of the war. Operation Market Garden. The plan? Use paratroopers to seize key bridges in the Netherlands and push into Germany. The reality? Delays, bad intel, and way too much optimism. Richard Attenborough directs a cast so star-packed it's almost comical. Sean Connery, Robert Redford, Michael Caine, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins. It feels like every big name from the 70s wanted in. And they didn't just show up for glamour shots. Many of them get gritty, unflattering roles where their characters fail as much as they succeed. This isn't a rah-rah war story. The battles are chaotic, the communication is messy, and the sense of frustration is constant. One standout scene shows Redford's unit trying to cross a river under heavy fire, a sequence so intense you might find yourself holding your breath. Critics at the time complained it was too long, but war isn't short, and neither is this movie. Today it's respected for its authenticity, thousands of extras, no CGI, and a willingness to admit that not every military gamble pays off. It's a cautionary tale told with massive spectacle. Midway 1976. Before computer effects, recreating massive naval battles was a logistical nightmare, and Midway pulled it off with a mix of real ships, archival footage, and an all-star cast. The film covers the 1942 Battle of Midway, the turning point in the Pacific where the U.S. Navy dealt a crushing blow to Japan. Charlton Heston leads the fictional storyline, but the movie weaves in historical figures played by Henry Fonda, Robert Mitchum, James Coburn, and others. The strategy meetings are as tense as the battles because you're watching a chess game where every move could mean thousands of lives. Some shots are clearly borrowed from actual WWII footage, which can be jarring if you notice the film grain shift, but it also gives the movie an undeniable authenticity. The carrier deck scenes, dogfights, and torpedo runs feel massive, even with the limitations of 1970s filmmaking. Midway doesn't go in for deep character studies, it's more about the operation itself. And that's fine, because the battle is the star here. It captures that rare moment when intelligence, timing, and courage aligned perfectly, changing the course of the war in the Pacific. The Great Escape, 1963. You've seen it referenced in cartoons, sitcoms, and commercials, but The Great Escape still stands on its own as one of the most entertaining WWII films ever made. Based on a true story, it follows Allied prisoners in a German POW camp as they plot a massive breakout. Steve McQueen, James Garner, and Richard Attenborough lead the cast, each playing a prisoner with their own role in the escape plan: tunnel digging, document forging, or distracting the guards. McQueen, of course, gets the most iconic moment, that motorcycle chase that ends at the barbed wire fence. What makes it work is the balance between suspense and camaraderie. The prisoners joke, share smuggled goods, and keep their spirits up even as the danger grows. But the movie never lets you forget the stakes. Getting caught doesn't end well. Historically, the film takes liberties, especially with McQueen's motorcycle stunt, which never happened in real life, but it captures the spirit of ingenuity and defiance. And like the real story, not everyone makes it out alive, which gives the ending a bittersweet punch. It's long but never boring, and it's one of those war movies you can watch over and over just to enjoy the ride. Patton, 1970. Before George C. Scott put on the uniform, no one had really captured General George S. Patton on screen with this much force. The movie opens with the now famous scene of Patton giving a blunt, profanity-laced speech in front of a giant American flag, a sequence so commanding it's become part of pop culture. Patton isn't a straight-up hero story. The film shows him as brilliant and fearless, but also arrogant, reckless, and sometimes his own worst enemy. We see his victories in North Africa and Europe, but also the controversies, slapping a soldier for battle fatigue, clashing with his superiors, and saying things that nearly ended his career. The writing is sharp, based partly on Omar Bradley's memoirs, and Scott's performance is magnetic. He famously refused to accept the Oscar he won, claiming competition between actors was meat parade stuff. That just made the movie's legend grow. Patton's blend of larger-than-life personality and uncompromising military strategy makes it endlessly rewatchable. It's not about worshiping the man, it's about showing how flawed brilliance can still change the course of history. Tora, 1970. If you want the most balanced cinematic take on the attack on Pearl Harbor, skip the glossy Hollywood romance version and go straight to Tora. It's part war movie, part historical docudrama, telling the story from both the American and Japanese perspectives. What makes it unique is its collaboration. One American director and two Japanese directors working on their respective sides of the story. That means you see not just the attack itself, but the months of preparation, miscommunication, and political maneuvering leading up to it. The attention to accuracy is obsessive. Real military consultants worked on the film, and while some aircraft had to be faked with modified planes, the tactics and timelines are spot on. There are no big stars chewing scenery here, just solid actors like Jason Robards and Martin Balsam giving grounded performances. The attack sequence itself is still impressive decades later, with explosions, ship damage, and aerial shots done practically. And unlike most war films, there's no heavy-handed moralizing. It just shows how a perfect storm of intelligence failures and planning led to one of the most shocking moments in U.S. history. The Guns of Navarone, 1961. Before mission. Impossible, there was The Guns of Navarone, a pure adrenaline WWII mission movie. The setup is simple but loaded with tension. A team of Allied commandos must infiltrate a Nazi-held Greek island and destroy two massive guns that threaten Allied ships. Easy? Not a chance. Gregory Peck, David Niven, and Anthony Quinn lead the squad, each playing a different personality type you've probably met in every team-based action film since. You've got the calm leader, the sarcastic explosives expert, and the hot-headed fighter who doesn't care about the odds. The chemistry between them sells the danger more than any explosion. Behind the scenes, this production was chaos. Niven nearly died from a blood infection during filming, and Peck openly hated some of the dialogue, refusing to say certain lines. Somehow, they pulled it together, and the movie went on to win an Oscar for special effects. Sure, by modern standards, some effects look dated, but the sense of adventure still holds up. This isn't just a war movie, it's the blueprint for every men on a mission film that came after. Without Navarone, you probably wouldn't have The Dirty Dozen, Kelly's Heroes, or even half the action movies of the 80s. Battleground 1949. Battleground is what happens when you let actual veterans shape a war movie. Directed by William Wellman, who himself flew in WWII, it tells the story of the 101st Airborne during the Battle of the Bulge, trapped in the freezing hell of Bastogne, Belgium. No overblown heroics here. The movie focuses on the day-to-day misery, frostbite, hunger, and the constant fear of being shelled. James Whitmore, Van Johnson, and a young Ricardo Montalban play soldiers just trying to survive one more night. The authenticity is no accident. Screenwriter Robert Pirosh was actually in Bastogne during the battle. 20 real paratroopers from the 101st Airborne were hired to train the cast and appear in the film, making sure every salute, boot step, and dugout looked real. The result is a movie that feels lived in, not staged. Steven Spielberg later cited Battleground as one of the films that influenced Saving Private Ryan, and you can see why. It's a reminder that sometimes the quiet moments, soldiers huddled in foxholes, sharing cigarettes, can say more about war than any battlefield charge. 30 Seconds Over Tokyo, 1944. Made during the war itself, 30 Seconds Over Tokyo dramatizes the famous Doolittle raid of April 1942, when U.S. bombers launched from an aircraft carrier to strike Japan in retaliation for Pearl Harbor. At the time, the mission's details were still fresh, and the movie became a morale booster for audiences. Van Johnson stars as pilot Ted Lawson, whose memoir inspired the film. The movie doesn't shy away from showing the physical and emotional toll on the crews. Lawson is injured during the mission, and his struggle to recover adds a personal dimension to the big-picture operation. Because it was filmed in 1944, the effects are entirely practical. Miniatures and rear projection stand in for combat footage, but the scale still impresses. The U.S. Navy even cooperated by providing actual carrier deck space for some scenes. While some of the dialogue has that polished, patriotic tone of the era, the flying sequences hold up remarkably well. It's both a piece of war history and a fascinating look at how Hollywood supported the war effort while it was still raging. Run Silent, Run Deep 1958. If you like your war movies claustrophobic and tense, Run Silent, Run Deep delivers. Starring Clark Gable and Burt Lancaster, it's set aboard a U.S. submarine hunting a Japanese destroyer in the Pacific. Gable plays a captain obsessed with revenge, while Lancaster is his skeptical first officer. The dynamic between the two leads is electric, part professional rivalry, part moral standoff. Lancaster reportedly clashed with Gable off-camera, and that tension bleeds into their performances in the best way. The film mixes real submarine footage with studio tank shots, creating an authentic sense of being deep underwater with nowhere to run. The title refers to a stealth tactic, staying deep and quiet to avoid detection, that becomes a metaphor for the crew's simmering conflicts. At a brisk 93 minutes, it's lean and efficient, avoiding the bloat of some war epics. And while later submarine movies like Das Boot took the realism even further, Run Silent, Run Deep remains a classic for its sharp storytelling and powerhouse performances. Guadalcanal Diary, 1943. Released just a year after the real Battle of Guadalcanal, this film was one of the first to depict U.S. Marines fighting in the Pacific. Based on war correspondent Richard Tregaskis's book, it blends staged scenes with actual combat footage shot on the island. Anthony Quinn and Richard Jekyll star as members of the 1st Marine Division, slogging through mud, heat, and relentless enemy fire. Because it was made so close to the actual events, the film carries a sense of urgency. You're watching a war that's still being fought. The movie is heavy on camaraderie and small moments, showing Marines joking around one minute and dodging sniper fire the next. It's not as graphic as later war films, but the blend of real footage and Hollywood dramatization gives it a unique, documentary-like texture. Guadalcanal Diary became a hit with both audiences and the military, who praised it for capturing the spirit of the Marines without sugarcoating the conditions. It's a time capsule of how WWII was presented to the public while it was unfolding. Sands of Iwo Jima, 1949. Sands of Iwo Jima is the movie that cemented John Wayne's image as America's ultimate war hero. He plays Sergeant John Stryker, a tough-as-nails Marine drill instructor who takes a group of raw recruits from training camp to the brutal beaches of Iwo Jima. Wayne Stryker is strict, gruff, and often unpopular with his men until they see the method behind his toughness. The film mixes fictional characters with real events and even uses actual combat footage from the battle. Most famously, it features the real flag raising on Mount Suribachi, spliced into the narrative with such precision it still catches first-time viewers off guard. The movie isn't subtle, it's very much a product of post-war Hollywood patriotism, but it works because Wayne commits to the role completely. His portrayal earned him his first Oscar nomination, and for many veterans, Stryker became the archetype of the Marine sergeant. Sands of Iwo Jima might not have the gritty realism of modern war films, but its blend of drama, action, and genuine history keeps it on the list of must-watch WWII classics. Kelly's Heroes, 1970. War movie or heist movie? Kelly's Heroes is both, and that's why it's such a blast. Clint Eastwood plays Private Kelly, who discovers that there's a stash of Nazi gold sitting in a bank behind enemy lines. Instead of sticking to the mission, he rounds up a ragtag group of soldiers, including Telly Savalas, Don Rickles, and Donald Sutherland, to go get it. Shot in Yugoslavia with real Sherman tanks provided by the local army, the action feels authentic even when the tone is pure caper comedy. The standout is Sutherland's oddball, a tank commander who lives by the motto, "always with the negative waves," and turns every scene he's in into comedy gold. Eastwood later admitted he was disappointed that the studio cut character-developing scenes, but even in its theatrical form, Kelly's Heroes works because it's just plain fun. It's a war movie that doesn't take itself too seriously, and yet the action scenes, especially the final standoff, are still tense and satisfying. It may not be the most historically accurate entry on this list, but it's easily one of the most rewatchable. 12 O'Clock High, 1949. 12 O'Clock High is the gold standard for air combat drama. Gregory Peck plays General Frank Savage, tasked with whipping a demoralized bomber group into shape during the early days of America's air war over Europe. What sets it apart is its focus on leadership under extreme pressure. Savage isn't a warm, friendly commander. He's cold, demanding, and willing to push his men to the breaking point to improve their odds of survival. Over time, you see the toll the job takes on him just as much as on the crews he commands. The film was shot with cooperation from the U.S. Air Force, using actual B-17 bombers and even combat footage from WWIIs. The aerial sequences are spectacular for their time, and the script is so well regarded that it's been used in military leadership training for decades. 12 O'Clock High isn't about glory, it's about the cost of command, and Gregory Peck's performance makes you feel every ounce of that weight. Operation Petticoat, 1959. Not every WWII movie has to be grim, and Operation Petticoat proves it. Cary Grant plays a U.S. submarine commander whose damaged sub, short on supplies, ends up painted pink and carrying a group of stranded nurses. Based loosely on real-life events, the film turns the chaos of wartime logistics into a series of comedic misadventures. The crew has to scrounge for parts, evade enemy ships, and somehow explain to their superiors why their submarine now looks like a giant flamingo. The humor is gentle but sharp, and Grant plays perfectly against Tony Curtis, who's the charming, slightly shady junior officer always working an angle. The combination of war setting and screwball comedy makes it unique on this list. It's about survival, but also about keeping morale up when everything seems ridiculous. Operation Petticoat was a huge box office hit and even inspired a TV series years later. It's proof that in the middle of a war, sometimes laughter really is the best weapon. The Dirty Dozen, 1967. The Dirty Dozen is as rough and rowdy as war movies get. Lee Marvin stars as Major Reisman, a no-nonsense officer tasked with training a group of military prisoners for a suicide mission behind enemy lines. The promise? Complete the mission and earn their freedom. The cast is stacked with tough guy legends: Charles Bronson, Jim Brown, Telly Savalas, Donald Sutherland. Watching them go from undisciplined criminals to a lethal strike team is half the fun. The other half is the action-packed climax where they storm a chateau full of German officers. The training sequences are just as entertaining as the mission itself, with Marvin's gruff leadership clashing constantly with the group's rebellious nature. The film was controversial in its day for its violence and anti-hero approach, but it became a massive hit and a blueprint for countless ragtag team movies that followed. It's gritty, it's loud, and it never pretends war is clean or noble, and that's exactly why it still works. Hell is for Heroes 1962. Steve McQueen was known for his cool, but in Hell is for Heroes, he dials it down into something sharper and grittier. The story is stripped to the bone. A small group of American soldiers has to hold a section of the Siegfried Line against a much larger German force. No sweeping battles, no grand speeches, just a handful of men trying not to get overrun. McQueen plays Private Reese, a loner whose instincts in combat are as good as his people skills are bad. The cast also includes James Coburn, Fess Parker, and even Bob Newhart in his film debut, doing an awkward phone call bit that somehow works in a war movie. Director Don Siegel keeps the focus tight. Instead of showing the big picture, he sticks you in the foxholes, making you feel every inch of the mud, cold, and tension. The final act, when the outnumbered Americans stage a desperate bluff to make it seem like reinforcements are coming, is pure nail-biting suspense. It's one of those movies that doesn't waste a second, and it proves you don't need an army on screen to make a war epic. The Enemy Below 1957. The Enemy Below is a chess match at sea, with a U.S. destroyer escort hunting a German U-boat in the South Atlantic. Robert Mitchum plays the American captain, Kurt Jürgens, the German skipper, and the brilliance of the movie is how evenly matched they are. There's no cartoon villainy here, just two smart, capable officers trying to outthink and outmaneuver each other. The tension builds with each sonar ping, each evasive turn, each depth charge. The ocean becomes the battlefield, and every move feels like it could be the last. Shot with impressive miniatures and real ships, the film's visuals still hold up. But it's the mutual respect between the captains that elevates it. By the end, you realize you've been rooting for both sides, not because you want either to win, but because they've earned it. This one picked up an Oscar for Best Special Effects and still stands as one of the smartest naval war films ever made. Objective Burma, 1945. Errol Flynn might not be the first name you think of for gritty war realism, but in Objective Burma, he delivers a surprisingly grounded performance. The movie follows a team of U.S. paratroopers dropped into Japanese-held territory to destroy a radar station, only to find themselves stranded and hunted. Released just months before the war ended, it's part action thriller, part endurance test. The jungle setting is a character in itself, steamy, claustrophobic, and unforgiving. Flynn plays the commanding officer trying to keep his men alive as exhaustion, hunger, and constant ambushes wear them down. While some veterans criticize the film for downplaying British contributions in the Burma campaign, it's still one of the most intense portrayals of behind enemy lines combat from the era. The long trek back to safety is almost more harrowing than the battle itself, and that's what makes it memorable. The Big Red One, 1980. The Big Red One is Samuel Fuller's semi-autobiographical take on WWII. Fuller served in the 1st Infantry Division, nicknamed the Big Red One, and the film follows a small squad from North Africa through Europe, all the way to the liberation of a concentration camp. Lee Marvin plays the grizzled sergeant who keeps his men alive through sheer willpower and experience. The squad, played by Mark Hamill, Robert Carradine, and others, experiences the war as a series of episodes, each with its own moral weight. The movie feels different from other war films because Fuller lived it. He knew the mix of boredom, sudden violence, and absurdity that comes with combat, and he put all of it on screen. It's not as polished as some big-budget epics, but that rawness is exactly what makes it hit harder. Wake Island, 1942. Made just months after the real Battle of Wake Island, this film captures the siege where a small group of Marines and civilians held off the Japanese as long as they could. Brian Donlevy and Robert Preston lead the cast, portraying a mix of real and fictional characters. Because it was made during the war, the tone is unapologetically patriotic, but the action is impressive for the time, especially the scenes of aircraft attacks and defensive positions. The urgency is real. Many of the people involved had friends or family still fighting overseas when the cameras rolled. Wake Island was a massive hit in 1942 and earned 4 Oscar nominations. Today, it stands as both a dramatization and a wartime artifact, a film made not just to entertain, but to inspire. From massive epics to tight, tense thrillers, these films prove WWII stories can be told in 100 different ways, through grit, humor, suspense, or sheer spectacle. Some put you right in the mud and smoke. Others keep you in the captain's chair making impossible calls. Which of these would make your top 5? Drop your picks in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and keep exploring the stories behind the greatest war films ever made, because history isn't just something you read, it's something you watch come alive.